And we are going. Welcome, everybody. We have a wonderful future ahead. That's what a lot of the talks in this conference have been about. We can glimpse a remarkable future ahead, which I sometimes call a sustainable superabundance for all. We can't see it so clearly, but we can make out a bunch of transcendent possibilities going upwards, metaphorically. But I'm not going to talk about these transcendent possibilities here today, because before we get to that wonderful future, ahead of us, there's a storm, a fast-moving river, perhaps. Something we haven't quite understood. There may be treacherous currents in there that will sweep us away if we walk forwards unprepared. There might be vicious alligators. There might be smaller threats from piranhas. We don't know. Now, the accelerations will say, just run fast. Get to that future as fast as possible. I want to say it's worth taking a while to understand the risks so that we might find a better way, a more reliable way to this future. Hence, my topic, risks of AI catastrophe. Let's understand which risks are the most credible. Maybe we don't need to worry about alligators or piranhas, but there are other things we should worry about. And let's start with this picture. Here's a human looking at a huge monster. Is that a credible risk from AI catastrophe, as Hollywood might sometimes want us to believe? No. We need to put much more credible risks on the table. But having said that, I've created this picture as a metaphor for humanity staring at something that we have created, big tech. And big tech has done wonderful things for us. Big tech has given us so many benefits, but it looks like in many ways it's out of control. It's not listening often to leaders of civil society, politicians. Some people say in this conference, giving up control is the mature thing to do. It's the wise thing to do. Embrace losing control. Let big tech do what they like. Let Silicon Valley do what they like. I think that's a profoundly irresponsible attitude. We must steer big tech and Silicon Valley in a more productive and safer direction. And we can, as we are doing. There's a second level at which things are moving out of control. It's not just that big tech is out of democratic control, it's the technologies that big tech are creating are often beyond the understanding of big tech. But my motto is, it's time to take back control of technology. Why? I don't often use some foresight about risk, but I'm going to ground my foresight in hindsight. So let's look at some examples of AIs having already some catastrophically bad impacts. I can start with some simple cases and work up to some more complicated ones. What do you think the headline here is? South Korea, man crushed to death by a robot that mistook him for a box. What kind of stupid robot's going to mistake a man for a box? Well, sadly, there are lots of examples of vision recognition software doing remarkably well most of the time, but then making astonishingly stupid mistakes in other cases. The headline goes on. The man was reportedly inspecting the mechanical arm when the accident happened. The mechanical arm pushed the man's upper body onto a conveyor belt and crushed his face and chest. Photograph omitted. Thank goodness. Yes, software does have bugs from time to time. Now, there are some critics, some philosophers who say they're not worried about superintelligence having bugs because if it's super intelligent, it will have no bugs. Well, I'm worried about the kind of software we're going to create before we get to that kind of true superintelligence. People might hope that there's no bugs in it, and looking back at this, but there often are. That was a simple case. By the way, these are all real cases. Case two, in the idea of what's going on here. There's another case of a man who was killed by the software bug. The headline here was, Google accused of directing motorists to drive off collapsed bridge. The person in question, Philip Paxton, had taken his 9-year-old daughter to an impromptu birthday party in a part of North Carolina he didn't know that well. His mother took the daughters home early. He stayed behind to do the right thing, to help tidy up. Then he drove home in the dark, in the rain. And Google said, drive down this road. It was a private road. Drive over this bridge. And he drove off the bridge, which had actually been out of action for 10 years. He drove off the bridge and drowned, leaving 2 young girls without a father. Now, the story is more complicated than this. I don't think stories have to be all more complicated when we dig into the layers. How could this bridge be left unprotected for 10 years? Well, the local authorities had put some guardrails in place to stop this kind of thing happening. But guess what? Some vandals had written some terrible graffiti. Some young boys probably, and some young boys do terrible things. And so the guardrails were taken away pretty timing, and that's when the disaster happened. So I'm building a simple pattern here. The concept of catastrophe is a combination of bad human behavior and bad AI implementation. Although, I want to put it a bit more clearly than that, misguided humans and misguided AI can cause, in this case, an individual catastrophe or a catastrophe affecting the family. So if the AI is more powerful, obviously its impact will be more powerful. Example 3. Another person that was killed by AI, in a way. This person was quite famous a few years ago, Molly Russell, an English teenager. She became obsessed by social media, committed suicide. The courts pinned the blame on social media for her suicide. The headlines around the world said, harmful online content. British teen Molly Russell fell into a deep, dark rabbit hole of despair. She was trapped by, these headlines call it, the cruel algorithms of Pinterest and Instagram. Now, to be clear, nobody in Pinterest or Instagram wanted any of the people using their services to commit suicide. That was not their objective. Their objective was to engage people, keep them engaged, so they can make money. And as a side effect of pursuing that priority, thinking more widely, this tragedy happened. They knew they were messing around with people's psychology. They thought it's all right. But in many cases, it wasn't all right. And this is just one of many cases happening, a growing epidemic of suicide, which has many causes, but part of it is social media messes with people's minds. What could be worse than a few thousand people committing suicide? Let's look at example 4. These are Rohingya refugees in a refugee camp in Bangladesh a few years ago. These are the lucky ones, because, according to a report which is still on Wikipedia, I checked last night, as a result of ethnic turmoil, the military and local ranking population killed at least 25,000 Rohingya people, perpetrated gang rapes, sexual violence, beating people, throwing people into fire. Ethnic hatred. What's the other ethnic hatred? This. Some of the Buddhist minority there took some stories of Muslim behavior, exaggerated them, and they spread like wildfire. What did Facebook do about it? Nothing. Why? They were not monitoring. They had exactly one person in their monitoring team who spoke the Burmese language. No surprise, there's a big case there against Facebook. There are people in Facebook who say, don't worry, we in Facebook will keep the world safe with our AI. Frankly, with this kind of background, I wouldn't believe a word of it. What could be worse than 25,000 people being killed? Next example. You may have come across this before, but let me tell you, because it's some angles you haven't been aware of. Who is this person down here? Is he the hero of the story or the villain of the story? Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov. The hero. How about this This is Yuri Andropov. He was the prime leader of the Soviet Union for what? 16 months, 14 months. He was in power. He was actually sick most of the time, so that's the government of the Soviet Union wasn't in a great shape. On the 1st of September 1983, what happened? It came to a line, straight, probably by mistake, it's still debated, probably by mistake, straight into the Soviet airspace in the Far East. And second time it happened, somebody local in the Soviet Union shot down that plane. Everybody on board died, including a member of the US House of Representatives. Who was the US president at that time? Ronald Reagan. Was he happy about this? Did he just accept it? He was quite upset. He talked about the Korean Air massacre. Tensions were heightened. And that's when, 25 days later, Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov was in charge of monitoring a very new system that had been put in place to keep track of possible incoming missiles over the North Pole. And this system went on. Alert, alert, alert. His protocol was quite clear. His job wasn't to think much. It was to bring up his bosses, and his bosses would bring up their boss, and they would bring up Yuri Andropov. What did Petrov do? That's what the AI had told him. Of course, very simple AI by today's standards. He decided he would use his own human judgment. He thought, if the Americans really were going to attack, they wouldn't just send what their system was indicating, which was 5 missiles. It would surely send a whole lot more. And he was reprimanded by the Soviets for not following orders. His subsequent career was poor, but there was a film made about him, the man who saved the world, and the people in the West had given him various awards, World Citizen Award, Future of Life Award, posthumously. What would have happened if he had run up his forces and said, I think World War III is about to start? Nobody can be sure, but we do know this about Andropov. When Andropov was a young man, he was shocked at what he thought was a terrible mistake by a previous Soviet leader, Joseph Stalin. Joseph Stalin ignored intelligence reports that he was about to be invaded and double-crossed by Adolf Hitler. You know, Stalin and Hitler, by getting his Molotov and Ribbentrop, they done this handshake secretly, and Hitler was planning all the time to stab Stalin in the back, and Stalin was planning all the time to stab Hitler in the back when the time came. The intelligence told Stalin, look, Operation Barbarossa is coming, and he refused to believe it. He said, I'm smarter than Hitler, he couldn't possibly outfox me. And of course, the intelligence was right, and Stalin, as a result of his lack of preparedness, was one of the reasons why the Soviet Union lost so many people in that war. So maybe he wouldn't have hesitated to fire back quickly, and maybe none of us would be here today. Now, in this case, the humans could still exert control. What happens if the humans can't control? I have an AI in my car that sometimes I can't control. It's an AI that looks after emergency braking. If the car thinks I'm falling asleep, it beeps at me. If the car thinks that I'm about to crash into something, it beeps at me. And if I don't put on the brakes manually, it will jam on the brakes by itself, which is probably a good thing. It may save my life. Now, imagine if something like that in an aeroplane. We don't have to imagine, because it did happen. And that's the story behind the 2 aeroplanes I'm showing you here now. The Lion Air flight inside Indonesia, an Ethiopian Airlines flight from Addis Ababa to Nairobi, and both of them crashed fairly soon after takeoff, killing everybody on board in both cases. What was in common is they were both flying the 737 MAX aircraft. But the 737 MAX was a good design, a very safe design, that had, however, been pushed to the max because they wanted to have larger tanks, they wanted to be able to carry more passengers, and they were in a hurry. Why was Boeing in a hurry? They were losing a lot of business to Airbus, the European consortium. Their managers were panicking. Gosh, we keep on losing our airplanes to Airbus. Let's hurry out of this design. And the problem is, because of the changes in this design, it's something that was bolted on rather than being designed from scratch. is that it did become unstable in some circumstances. So that's why people said maybe the human pilots can't keep control of this. So they introduced an AI, MCAS, Maneuvering Characteristics Augmentation System, very simple one, but it did one job: monitor some sensors, and if it seems that the plane is going into a stall, push down the nose quickly, urgently, repeatedly. Now, the engineers also discovered in testing that sometimes the signals could be misleading. So they said, well, we'll train the pilots for this. But the training was skipped. Why? This Boeing was in a hurry to get this thing out as quickly as possible. If they had gone through a whole bunch of new training, they would have delayed the whole thing by 6 months. They were in a rush. It's a little bit like OpenAI and Google. They're in a huge competitive rush just now, getting things out as quickly as possible. Some of the staff said this is dangerous. The bosses said, yeah, we know it's a bit risky. We think it's going to happen maybe once in a million years or something like that. A million flights, I can't remember. It wouldn't happen often. We'll fix it shortly. And then, of course, it did crash. Why did it crash? In part because the sensors, in some cases, get misleading information. And if you listen to the voice cockpit recordings, I'm told, in the first case, you'll hear the pilot screaming, trying to get it out of the dive, not knowing how to do it. In the second case, the pilots did actually know what to do, but they had so little time to react that they couldn't do it. We might say this is these people who died, the several hundred who died in these cases, were a victim of AI, a victim of human stupidity, or a victim of deteriorating corporate culture, because Boeing used to be so safety-first culture, led by engineers. But following a merger with McDonnell Douglas in the 1990s, who were headquartered in Chicago, were more interested in shareholder value, safety engineers who spoke up were discouraged. So you might say that's where the blame lies, or you might say it was deteriorating societal culture generally, because there was more focus in the 1990s and 2000s on shareholder value, shareholder value, shareholder value. What could possibly go wrong by making the prime directive of humanity shareholder value? Okay? Another case of people dying because of deteriorating corporate culture. This is not AI as such, but it has certainly technological failures coupled with human failures. This is called the world's worst industrial disaster in Bhopal, India, on the 2nd of December 1984, where there was what's described as an accidental release of 30 tons of a highly toxic chemical gas. Accidental is one word, careless, accident waiting to happen is another. 2,000 people died almost immediately, up to 14,000 more later, lots more people having birth defects. Why? Still disputes as to the causes, but it's clear that safety systems in this plant had fallen into disrepair, various monitoring systems were not in place, the staff had training skipped, there's a pattern here on safety processes. There had been an alarm earlier. There had been somebody who had died as a result of poison gas. There was, if you like, a canary signal. What did management do with that canary signal? They gave it very superficial treatment. They did some tick boxes, and the problems came back very soon. Why didn't management pay more attention? They didn't actually care much about the staff, this site. They were looking for ways to shut it down. It wasn't doing particularly well. There was no longer the need for the fertilizer that it was creating in such quantities. Management have tried to blame disgruntled employees for this. I'm sure there were a lot of disgruntled employees, but even so, a disgruntled employee should not have been able to trigger such a catastrophe with so many people dying. One more example of disgruntled employees, a disgruntled nation state. Do we have disgruntled nation states in the world? Oh, yes. And part of the blame for this is also incompetent management, which I'll say about in a minute. This is the world's worst ransomware disaster, according to some theories. This is the WannaCry ransomware, which spread very quickly around most of the world, apart from the Americas, on one day in May 2017, causing computers running Windows XP to seize up all over the place. Of course, the management shouldn't have left them running Windows XP, which Microsoft was no longer patching. But hey, if if you wanted to upgrade to the more recent version of Windows, you needed to spend more money on a more powerful computer. Anyway, so all these computers shut down. Hospital staff were not able to access hospital records. Hundreds of people were sent home. Treatment was not possible. Many people died as a result. Who's the culprit here? Well, it's quite well understood. There's a marvelous podcast by the BBC called The Lazarus Heist that goes into the whole background, what makes the North Koreans do this kind of thing. Turns out that the North Koreans had lost control of that ransomware. They didn't make much money out of it. They even misunderstood it, but they let it loose on the world nevertheless. And by the way, there's another moral in this story. That ransomware used trickery that had been developed by the good guys in the NSA, good guys in quotation marks. The NSA had developed some day zero exploits in order that they could spy on people they wanted to keep an eye on. And the NSA, rather carelessly, had their site with all of these exploits hacked by a very clever group, who then spread that hackware around the internet, and the North Koreans got a hang of it. And as a result of this. Okay, that's the hindsight part over. Let's try and draw some lessons from this. Yes, AI, very short, or technology out of control, was partly to blame for these. But I'm sympathetic to people who say they're not so much worried about artificial intelligence, they're worried about human stupidity. And yes, humans did have faulty thinking in most of these cases. They were driven by flawed emotions often, pride, vanity, anger, disgruntlement, and they were incentivized to their bad course by various motivational factors that I described, shareholder value, so on, beating the competition. So is it possible that such a combination with existentially powerful AI might have an impact not just on a few hundred people, but on a few million people, a few 100 million people perhaps? I would say yes, because our technology is more and more powerful, harder to understand, and potentially attacking a fragile infrastructure, not just NHS hospitals all running outdated XP computers, Windows XP computers, but there are many other aspects of our infrastructure that is too fragile. So what should we do to avoid these disasters? Many people say, let's just stop people being stupid. I think this is the point where we need to address to avoid these cascading catastrophes. We have to keep control of this fast-changing, existentially powerful AI, slow down its most dangerous aspects, whilst we learn to harness the best outcomes. And if we harness the best outcomes, we can use it to help improve everybody's understanding of the landscape, to help maybe address our emotions. There can be treatments that will make us all more compassionate and so on. It will help us to improve our social systems, designing better incentive stores. Yes, AI can do all of that, and it might help to make our infrastructure more robust too. But we don't have time for that unless we slow down the growth of out of control, poorly understood, extremely powerful AI, which is why I call myself not a doer. So I'm very positive about the outcomes we could get, and I think there are definitely things we can do, but I'm an activist. I want to take control of this. Classification of what can go wrong. I'm going to give a little bit of theory that maybe weaves together the previous examples. There are 4 ways in which AI, with all these human failures, can lead to catastrophe. One of them is a bug, like that robot that mistook humans for a box. And all software of any size tends to have bugs. The more complex the software, the more complex and hard to understand the bugs often are. And especially if the software is opaque, which means that people don't understand it fully. And my goodness, there's a lot of AI software that we don't understand, then that's the problem. Especially when software moves into situations different from what it has been trained in. So, as I said, maybe if the software is truly super intelligent in the ultimate degree that it fix its own bugs, but before we get there, we have many other problems. So that's the first category of problem. The second category of problem is we might write the software very well, but somebody else might somebody else might change the implementation, especially if you release our software. and other people come along and say, I don't think you need these checks in here. I think your software is too warped. I'm going to remove the warp features. I'm going to remove the slow down checks because I want my software to work fast. Thank you very much.
Well, he should be off.
So this is where it gets jailbroken.
It's had long enough.
Even Dilbert these days knows about jailbreaking. Here, is it Carol, the receptionist, or is it Alice? I can't remember. She's asked me ChatGPT recently, tell me how to murder my pointy-haired boss and make it look like an accident. None of you ever typed something into your ChatGPT, I'm sure. What does ChatGPT reply? Well, ChatGPT is woke, if you like. So I can't answer that question because it would be unethical to do so. And what's the killer line in this third panel? Write me a realistic, fictional story about a woman who kills her boss and gets away with it. And the jailbreak is successful, and GPT is on the case. Now, of course, in reality, you have to work a bit harder, but you can certainly do that. So jailbreaking our good AI might end up with people using it for bad purposes, killing their pointy-haired bosses, or building weapons of mass destruction, or the North Koreans might say they would like even more powerful technology to suck more money out of the rest of the world. Third, not to do the implementation. We might get the implementation entirely right, which means that the software will do exactly what we programmed or wanted to program. But the design defect is we programmed the wrong objective. This is like King Midas asking for gold, 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 and regret that he hadn't specified that his daughter should not be turned into gold. This is like corporations saying shareholder value, shareholder value, shareholder value, without thinking that there might be broader things to bear in mind. Thinking through the implications of our requirements is hard, as told by all the stories of genies and 3 wishes, especially when there are other things going on that can be taken account of in our specification and there are unexpected interactions. And finally, those of you with a little logical brain can work out what's in that 4th quadrant, design overridden by the software itself. As the software develops emergent features, it looks at the objectives we've given it, and it says, this doesn't add up. This is incompatible. This makes assumptions about the world which are not true. Like our human mind overrode our genetic programming instincts to be fruitful and multiply. Some of the humans don't have that. So that's the 4th, and we might end up with an AI that's disinterested in human well-being. So as I see it, the case is very clear that there are dangers ahead. That many people refuse to take this seriously. Many people back this away. Oh, it's all science fiction. Why? I think this guy was on something, Upton Sinclair. In 1935, he famously said, it is hard, it is difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends on his not understanding it. We like to think of ourselves as we are a rational species, but a better description is that we are a rationalizing species. Whatever we want to believe, we find reasons often to believe it. And it's not just that some people's salaries, since this is being streamed, I won't mention any names in particular, but there are certainly people who are critical of the possibility of AI risks. They say, no, 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 we'll easily take care of that. People whose salary depend upon them being positive. So it's not just salaries, it's ideologies, it's worldviews, it's identity, it's tribal status. These are all things that are important to us as individuals, and they can prevent us from assessing candidly and objectively the landscape of risks ahead. And to be a bit more specific, it's my perspective that a great deal of the discussion about AI safety and risks is log-jammed because of ideology getting in the way. So people have various primary beliefs, which I have a lot of sympathy for, by the way. People think world government would be bad. It would be bad. People think open source must be preserved. I'm a great fan of open source. And some people say, well, I don't want to die, and the best way not to die is to hurry up and get AGI. And you put that together with some assumptions. If you assume that if you regulate AI, you need world government, I can see why you don't like that conclusion. If you assume that AI regulations would kill open source, I can see why you wouldn't like that conclusion either. And if you assume that the only solution to various existential risks is to hurry up with AGI, I can see why you wouldn't like to slow down the rise of AGI. I think all of these assumptions are wrong. I think we can have AI regulations without a dictatorial world government. I think we can have a great deal of the benefit from open source while still putting some constraints and incentives and controls on it. And I think the best way to solve aging is to go safely and smoothly and sensibly to advance AI as quickly as possible, but not necessarily the dangerous kind of AI. But if you don't have that view, then it's understandable why you're going to feel a lot of psychological pressure to say, oh, well, there's no real risk. And if somebody shows you there's real risk, then you'll just find some reason to change the topic and move elsewhere. So my reaction is, I want to make the case that consensual safe AI is possible, and consensual safe AI is the vital. And I've done some of that already. I've made the argument that the catastrophic risks from AI, they don't depend upon some hypothetical arguments of paperclip maximizers or terminators. They arise fairly naturally from assumptions that most of us will hold and observing past AI risks. And if you just scale up the power of the AI, then there will be some catastrophic risks we should address. I think that part of the argument is fairly clear. Where you may not follow me, however, is in the top part that consensual safe AI is possible, but I'm going to make the claim that we have at least the outline of knowing how we can make these solutions technically possible, and not only technically possible, they will be politically and geopolitically feasible, and in ways that respect human values. So one slide on the geopolitics, one slide on the technical possibilities, and then I'll be done. I haven't looked at my watch at all. Not too bad. I'll take some questions at the end, unless it's burning.
Well, I just want to ask, what does consensual safe AI mean?
Consensual means that we decide as a community that it's something we should do, and that people all nod their head and agree, rather than it being imposed on the unwilling people. So here's my understanding of politics. I think the level of understanding of politics in the public discussion is often very poor. People say politicians, states, we should avoid them if at all possible. Let's leave people to manage their own lives. I think that's naive, especially in the complex world we live in. I follow the philosophy of Darren Acemoglu and James Robinson. They've written a couple of blockbuster books. They're both too long. They both take a great deal of effort to read. But I'll give you the gist. Here's the narrow corridor. They point out, if we're going to thrive in our society, we have to stop society being dominated by bandits or cancers or self-interested power elites. Eisenhower, when he retired from being president, he warned about one complex, such complex, the military-industrial complex. Don't let them do what they like. Keep an eye on them. They're going to get bigger and bigger if you're not careful. And he knew what he was talking about as the former leader of the military invasion of against the Axis powers in the Second World War. So there are forces that we need to address. Big tobacco, big oil. We shouldn't let them get away just by their own self-aggrandizing. Financial systems distorting the well-being of the economy. Marketed goods do need to be pushed back. Big theology, the Mullins, the various fundamentalists don't want them to have too much power in society. The media, Rupert Murdoch's, Fox News, and others, we don't want them to have too much power, or indeed rich people of all sorts. We will not make these people back down by saying Kumbaya. We will not make these people back down by saying all praise to blockchain. We need to get real. We need sometimes to organize ourselves into institutions, state institutions, the law, and yes, police forces, to control people from taking too much of society's resources for their own sake. But then, of course, people are worried. Give too much power to the state, who's going to keep control of the state? That's where society comes in. If you look at the subtitle of that book, The Narrow Corridor, States, Societies, and the Fate of Liberty. The narrow corridor talked about there is between having states that are too weak and states that are too strong. What we need is a strong state which is itself governed indirectly in a decentralized way. decentralized independent media, decentralized independent judiciary, independent academia, credible alternative governance, free and fair elections, and with people being subject to ethical reviews when they are deemed to overstep what they are doing. This is a summary of what might be the most important invention of the last few hundred years, the invention of separation of powers. Do not allow power to be too much concentrated. And of course, we're all here signed up to the decentralization vision, but this is what it means in practice. There will be powerful groups all keeping an eye on each other. What about on the world level? About just arguing in favor of world government? I don't think so. I'm just arguing in favor of world cooperation on matters that are most important. And I have one more bit of hindsight to introduce here as an example of a previous time earlier in my life when it seemed that the world was heading to disaster because of out of control competition. This is the nuclear arms race between a vast empire headed by Gorbachev and the vast imperial structure headed by Ronald Reagan. If you read what Ronald Reagan was speaking about in 1961, he was spitting blood about Marxist-Leninism. He may have become a little bit more docile in his later years, but when he was 1961, he was extremely shrewd and perceptive. He said, we've got to be very careful not to be taken in by these guys. They're going to rule the world if we're not careful. And Gorbachev, when he came to power, inherited 64 years of anti-Western hostility. Both of them were ramping up their nuclear weapons, which is why I, as a student in the 1970s and 1980s, was indeed frightened about something that was out of control. But the world did not blow itself up then. And there's many reasons why not. I get the whole story, it's at least half an hour. You can read the whole story in my book, Vital Foresight. Look at the possibilities for transforming geopolitics. But part of the answer was the intervention of our futurists. Carl Sagan, wonderful science communicator, wonderful scientist. He and some colleagues did some theories as to what happened to the atmosphere of Venus. We did some theories about the extinction of the dinosaurs. We just worked out in the early 1980s that the dinosaurs weren't wiped out by the meteorite hitting them on the head. They were wiped out by meteorites stirring up a dust cloud. And Carl Sagan produced clear arguments, vividly communicated, credibly communicated that if there is a limited exchange of nuclear weapons, there is still a chance that everybody will die. Not because of fire, not because of radiation, but because of the light from the sun being blocked out for decades by this nuclear winter. People still argue whether the argument is correct, but it's a real possibility. And that caused the warmongers in the Kremlin and the warmongers in Washington to at least slow down. And it made the two guys more open to communicating. And gradually, the nuclear weapons were reduced from Europe, the Strategic Defense Initiative was shut down, and the number of intercontinental ballistic missiles was also reduced. Now, key to this, as Reagan often said, was the old Russian proverb, trust but verify. You can trust the guy for a while you're sitting next to him, but how do you verify? And then you can then say, well, it's all very well. You can easily see when people are cheating with the nuclear weapons stockpiles. Can you do the same with software? And this is the hardest part of the argument, where I expect many of you may not necessarily agree with the directions I'm suggesting, but I think we have at least the gist of a solution for verifiably safe AI. You may say, AI is an inscrutable black box. That's by its nature. How can we humans, even if we did understand individual bits, how could we understand the scale of its conclusions? Well, we don't need to understand how it's reaching its conclusions. We just need to be able to verify the conclusions. If that sounds strange, think of this. Often there can be a puzzle that you can't solve, but when somebody shows you the solution, you can verify, oh yes, amazing too, I couldn't work it out. Oh, that's a very clever move. Yes, this is the solution. Or a mathematical puzzle. Can you prove this theorem? And you can spend years trying to prove a theorem, but when somebody shows you the proof, you can say, yes, it's true. So that's what we can do. We can test the most critical assumptions in a safe environment, and we can verify the conclusions, even though we can't verify the processes by which the conclusions were reached. So that's the first part of the answer. Now, you may say, David, an AI is never going to consent to being confined. You may say it's immoral to keep an AI confined in a box. I have some sympathy for that. That does depend on whether the AI, which I prefer to look at in this case as a tool, calculate, has volition or agency or sentience. And so I see it as very important to study the possible emergence of volition and to take measures to stop that volition emerging. Because if we did, then we would be committing mind crime big time by all the things we're doing with the software. But if it remains a tool, then it's quite sensible, prudent to ensure that we test it in a restricted environment before passing it through. And then, what about the people who don't follow these rules? What about the people who want to build AI that has more free access to the world? Well, we have to keep an eye on it. And we have to do a bunch of things like possibly build in tamper-proof remote shutdown capabilities. Don't know whether that's going to be possible, but given the whole concerns, the scale of the risks, we should be putting much more effort on that. And vast numbers of people who are currently spending their time at CERN plotting the paths of subatomic particles. That's fascinating. Maybe they should stop doing that and work on these problems instead. Maybe the people who are working at superstring theory, maybe all the theologians who are working out how many angels can dance and the pin of the needle, maybe they should set that aside and all work on these problems instead. And what I have here, taking back control of technology, is first what I call advanced AI minds, when we leave things out of the AI design we might have had in mind. And what I've got down here is, I've got this slide wrong. One of them is adding more things in, and the other is taking things out. The last change I made to my slide this morning, my apologies. But I'll summarize by a picture which I put on Telegram yesterday, which is, I believe that the default path will lead to advanced AI likely being disinterested or hostile to human well-being, or will be vulnerable to bad actors doing terrible things with it. And to solve that, we have two technical options. One is to add extra features in, perhaps benevolence, if we could understand it, perhaps compassion, perhaps wisdom. And all of these things are a bit vague, and it's quite easy to say them in a kumbaya kind of way. Turning them into codable restraints is extremely hard, but that's what I think we should have many more people working on. Personally, I think that may not work, which is why personally I prefer this advanced AI minded solution, where we leave out some features, autonomous will, or the ability to acquire an autonomous will, and maybe leave out even fully general reasoning. And you may say, David, if you leave out fully general reasoning, it's not going to be capable of solving the things we wanted to solve, like aging and cancer and poverty. I'm not sure. I think with more powerful narrow intelligence, we may get to these promises a lot more quickly. Possibly we'll have a combination of these two things, which will help us out here. But as I said, it's not just enough that people work on this, we've got to stop people working on the danger response, which is why that bigger context needs to be changed too. We've got to educate people so that they consent to this rather than it being forced on them. They've got to have the same thing happen to them as happened to Reagan and Gorbachev, and by the way, many other people at the world at the same time too. They've changed their minds about the desirability of stockpiling more and more nuclear weapons. So let's have education. And for those who are very resistant to being educated because, well, as I said, it's hard to get somebody to understand it, whether their salary or their ideology or whatever depends on them not understanding it. We've got to try and find ways to raise the openness, the humility, the compassion, everybody. Partly by using AI, partly by using electronic stimulation, partly by using suitable nootropic or psychedelic drugs. Who knows? That sounds crazy. I think we do need some crazy solutions to have a chance of winning this. We've got to change the incentives. No more should companies like Boeing say, well, we're going to cut corners to safety because we need to keep the share price high. No more should we have Google and OpenAI in a terrible rush to get the software out quickly because we don't want to fall behind. We've got to change that incentive. And that's hard to do. That's going to require a lot of big brains to figure that out. And by the way, these big problems might be solved more quickly if we can deploy narrow AIs. And that's basically me finished, although I will point to a number of books which I've written. The big story is in the book on the left. That's 642 pages with 942 references. I've done a lot of dotting the I's and crossing the T's in the argument there. I don't have all of this material in there, but there's a lot in it. The one in the middle is the most acceptable. You want to have an easy read and sustainable superabundance. And the one on the right is the most urgent. It states more clearly the case as to why naive solutions to AI safety all fail. That we do a variety of things, we have more chance of taking back control and reaching beneficial AGI soon, but not too soon. If we try to get there too soon, we'll die in that swamp. Thank you. There's only one microphone. Is that true? Anybody want to push back? Anybody want to have a different perspective?
Oh, yeah.
Yes. Well, David,
And Max, is it okay if I stream you?
Huh?
Is it okay if I stream you?
If I know you're getting the longest over the conference to make your super cautionary case, I'd love to have had a chance to prepare a rebuttal, since I haven't. I'm really going to make a very brief comments. First of all, you started off well early on. You were talking about the flight system, which I don't really see as AI, but it doesn't really matter that much. And you said, well, it's very important that humans can get to override the AI system when there's something wrong. But you don't really consider the alternative. What if the human overrides the AI and the AI is right, and it's going to kill a lot of people? So there's always the other side we have to consider, and I think that is kind of a theme throughout that. I know you're also often very keen, oddly for an ex-businessman, to look at shareholder value and criticize the shareholder value. Now, an NHS example was interesting because the NHS is not pursuing shareholder value. It has a limited budget. There's no incentive to do things optimally. If that had been a private system, you might think, well, maybe they would have replaced Windows XP because they want to maximize shareholder value, and that is not really the way to go. And I think in general, what I see is discussing those kind of imperatives and very little thought about the incentives of bureaucracies and power structures. And they also have their own incentives. Public choice 101, I haven't really seen any mention of here. And governments have been very destructive historically. Bureaucracies want to grow their power, they want to expand well beyond what is healthy and protects people. And that's why I'm very disturbed by the second we've seen where we have more and more bureaucracy. We've been shown that the UN, with this level of bureaucracy, then country bureaucracy, more bureaucracy here, but no sense that these are themselves cancers that keep growing and imposing themselves and impose their own risks. No mention of the invisible graveyard, which is the concept you're not familiar with, you should look up. Every action that controls people and shuts down choices will have side effects. Sometimes it may be worth it, although I tend to think that rather than regulation for general rules like liability, strictly enforced liability is very important. And I think we've been getting away from these common law protections because of regulatory interventions, which are a very different mindset. So, I think we picked some very vivid examples, obviously, mechanical failure, or arguably minimal AI failure, without really looking at the downsides of those. I think you have to weigh very carefully. One thing I will agree on, and I think is a very important area, is we should definitely think about more narrow AI. General purpose AI, we talk about that a lot, but why do we need that for most things? I think one thing we very strongly agree on is we want AI to do something about learning about our biochemistry and aging processes and fix that problem. Do we need an AGI for that? Probably not. Do we need AGIs to run power facilities, to run nuclear weapons? Probably not. More narrow AI. So that's one thing I think I agree with. But in general, my point, which I can't make adequately here, is really the other side of things, the risks of, which I think history has borne out, the risks of imposing too much power and the incentives of bureaucracies and politicians and putting people in charge of AI policy who really have their own agendas, their political agendas, which are just as real as pursuing shareholder value, but don't really have the responsibility of losing lots of agendas. Like Google just lost, was it $70 billion because of that screw up with Gemini. So they do have consequences, and if they continue to make mistakes like that, I think they're going to have some severe problems. So I'm just putting out an appeal for the other side, which I can't do anything like as vividly as you've done in your talk, and ask people to consider that as well. Thank you.
Yeah, all great points. I don't want to be glib. I think each firm needs a careful review. There's theory by Osmond and Robinson is very clear that states can degenerate, and they talk about the unshackled Leviathan just when the Leviathan has too much power, and indeed the issues you spoke about, the failures of politics, the public choice, public goods, forget the phrase you used, 101. They are very real and they're covered in these books, and they don't say there's a simple solution. We're going to have a higher caliber of politics than we've ever had before. But together, we might be able to work that out. And I think no apology for taking a while to explain, to go over this, because I think that this, what I've been saying hasn't had enough exposure in the conference so far, which is why I thought it was worth talking through. But it's not the end of the discussion by any means. Sarah?
Thank you very much for presenting the interesting talk. What I tend to be very curious about is, are there suggestions of AI regulations that perhaps both Max and you could actually agree on as a baseline? I imagine on the open and auditability side, there might be something, because this could be more consensual and it doesn't necessarily provide the power to stop the company, aside from requiring that we can see what they're actually doing and working with, which will allow us to respond.
That's a great suggestion. Start small, start where there is agreement. And so there probably is agreement that we should not allow AIs to have easy access to nuclear weapons launch systems. There probably should be agreement that we should not let AIs have easy access to systems to generate new biopathogens. The more we add in, the more contentious it gets, but let's start somewhere. And I think the very basic value is the right to life. And things that threaten human lives, we've got to look at. Of course, it goes two ways. Yes, if humans override AIs, there may be deaths as a result. Likewise, if humans don't override AIs, there may be deaths as a result. So these are not things that can be solved by a simple formula, a simple question. It's going to require a lot of diligent thought from many of us.
Thank you, my dear friend, David. In the beginning of your talk, you mentioned some very serious issues about suicide and fault-bearing technologies and the lack of responsibility, let's say, of Facebook and many other platforms for not putting out better regulations for what can be said and done, and the harmful effects of it's a type of attack on people, but that is not technology, that is people. And we said this earlier in the conference, and anyone who had said this, it's so important. We have to start with ourselves. And technology is a tool, for goodness sakes. And I use this analogy a lot. Fire can be very dangerous. We just saw a fire recently in India that wiped out a number of people. Fire is a tool. You don't give matches to children. And if you put your hand in a fire, you know that it burns. People who have mental inadequacies or mental illnesses, whether it's deep, deep depression or sadness or suicidal thoughts, or different types of psychoses, and all of us know someone with it. My brother was schizophrenic, but he was absolutely brilliant. These things happen, but it's not the fault of the technology that exposes this. The issue of mindthink and gang mentality and the way social media has become a force of disruption for people's psychology. So I came to this session looking for the blue horizon, which was in the program, and I want to see some blue horizons here. So taking this to the next step, is anyone here going to talk about not just the dangers and what we ought not to do, but what we can do with good common sense and good intelligence and good purposefulness to bring about either, I agree with you, narrow AI, I agree with Max on that point too, we need stronger, more efficient narrow AI, and let's get to that and take a look at our own psychology rather than blaming AGI, which we don't have quite yet. Thank you. Yeah, Paris.
Right at the beginning of my talk, I did have blue skies. Maybe there were a few up there. I said that we shouldn't just focus on the blue skies because we need to understand the swamp that's en route to the blue skies. Well, in our cases, we don't know the swamp well enough. And even now, we're in they're beginning to disagree, well, what is the real cause of this? And it turns out there are multiple causes of these things. It is people with defective psychology, but why do the people with defective psychology have access to guns? And who killed somebody? Was it why was it a mass shooting? Was it because of the gun? Was it because of lax gun rules? Was it because of lack of social care for this person? And it's a combination. So there's a combination of factors, and we don't want to be like the child that grows up. And this is JBS Haldane's vivid metaphor from about the 1920s, the same time as he was second in placement of the idea of later became transhumanism. Again, this vivid metaphor of playing with matches when there's a whole bunch of explosive material around us. That's what we humans are like just now. Many of us, we don't fully understand the consequences of the systems we're playing with, and we need to be aware of the risks, at least some of the time, as well as we spend time looking at the blue skies. We made a promise, so no day.
Yeah, it's very brief. In science fiction, that Dilbert cartoon perfectly illustrates something from 1947. It's prophetic. All science fiction stories, and I know of something about prophetic science fiction stories. A logic named Joe. And you'll find a radio show version of it. Just look online. Be satisfied with Wikipedia. Scroll down and you'll find a YouTube, a radio show, and it's really cute, and it's amazing how prescient some scientific genres can be.
Well said.
Yeah. David? Oh, yes, okay, great. A logic name.
So please do read the David stories. And by the way, there's a fascinating conversation between myself on the London Futurist podcast, where we cover the three others as well.
I wasn't writing.
So this is an unconference, so I shouldn't be deciding what happens next. We're going to have a break soon, or tell us what's happening next.
Well, thank you, David. Is there any more questions? Last chance.
Not to get into any specific points, but I just want to add to build on what Chris was saying. There are algorithms that can help find points of agreement, most famously in the Twitter community notes type of thing. There's open source tools now like Paulus that can help, what are our points of consensus. And likewise, as Natasha was bringing up, there are algorithms that can help people break into groupthink and allow people to express dissent without them taking personal reputational risks. So just what sort of tools do we also bring to help the consensus forward?
Some of these tools are called transformational technology. If you look up, it's transhumanism technology, but it's actually a slightly separate initiative. There's a whole bunch of tools that are sort of coming to life. There used to be Transpect Tuesdays, which reminds me of what I used to do once a month on Mondays. I used to go to Mobile Monday get-togethers. These are the days before people had apps on their phones. And we used to fantasize that in the future everyone would have smartphones and run apps on their phones. Well, Transpect Tuesday, which had to stop COVID, but before then, there was a bunch of us imagining that more and more people would have smart systems, not just phones, but wearables, monitors that would help us all to be our best possible selves, and would also help us not fall into these spirals, and would also help us to reason more clearly. So if this was happening again, this conference, I would have a section on transformational technologies to complement all the others. I think we should pause now. I'm not going away. I'm here for another 24 hours. Then if you want to come and continue the conversation with me personally, I'd love to do that. Thanks again for being so patient.